The signal had been there for 400 years. Then it wasn't. Vethara 7 processed the absence the way she processed all data in layers, cross-referenced, verified against redundant arrays before committing to a conclusion. The conclusion, verified 17 times in 6 hours, was simple. The humans had stopped transmitting. Not stopped, gone quiet. There was a difference, and Vethara 7 had learned, in 40 years of monitoring the species designated Homo sapiens, that the difference mattered. She filed the anomaly report and went back to work. The conclave would decide what it meant. The conclave decided it meant nothing. Civilizations went silent. It happened. The Duvari had gone dark for 60 years before re-emerging with a new religious framework and a prohibition on electromagnetic communication. The Scareth had simply turned inward for a century, then outward again, blinking like something waking from deep sleep. The humans were young, volatile, prone to what the conclave's senior analysts called civilizational thrashing. They would re-emerge. Vethara 7 filed a dissent. She had been monitoring humanity for 40 years. She knew the rhythm of their noise, the overlapping transmissions, the dense, chaotic, gloriously inefficient broadcast spectrum they filled like a species that had never learned to be quiet. They did not go quiet. They did not know how. The dissent was noted. Vethara 7 was assigned to investigate. She took a scout vessel, light and fast, a crew of 3 including herself, and she pointed it at the small yellow star the humans called Sol. What she found on approach was not silence. It was the debris field that made her stop the ship 4 light minutes out, running passive sensors with the drive cut, floating in the dark. The debris field was vast. It stretched across the inner system in a flat disk that caught the star's light and scattered it in fragments, metal, composite, the dense ceramic signatures of heat shielding and organic matter. A great deal of organic matter. The sensors picked up the chemical signatures automatically, cataloged them, and Vethara 7 sat very still in her crash couch and looked at the numbers. Billions. The organic mass was consistent with billions of human bodies, or what remained of them, distributed across the orbital plane of the 3rd planet. She ran the numbers again. The numbers did not change. "What are we looking at?" Prathais, her pilot, asked from the forward couch. His secondary sensory organs were flat against his skull, the Keth physiological sign for controlled fear. "A graveyard," Vethara 7 said, "or a battlefield, I cannot yet determine which." She took the ship in slowly, running every passive sensor, generating no active signals. The 3rd planet Earth, the humans had called it, a word that meant simply ground, simply soil. The arrogance of a species that named their world after the dirt they stood on was still there. Still blue and white from this distance, still turning on its axis, still orbited by its single large moon. But the moon had craters it hadn't had 40 years ago, fresh ones, still sharp-edged, not yet softened by micro-impact erosion. Recent. Decades recent, not centuries. And there was something in Earth orbit that had not been there before. It was large. Vethara 7's instruments struggled with the geometry of it. The thing did not want to be measured in any framework she had available. It occupied a space that her sensors reported as approximately 40 kilometers along its longest axis. But the mass readings were inconsistent in ways that suggested either her instruments were malfunctioning, or the object was not entirely present in the dimensions her instruments were designed to measure. "That is not human technology," Prathais said. "No," Vethara 7 agreed, "it is not." She opened the archive. The conclave maintained records on every known hostile species, every aggressive non-member civilization, every threat that had been catalogued in 8,000 years of interstellar contact. She ran the geometry of the object against every record. No match. Whatever had come to Earth had not come from anywhere the conclave knew about. She was still processing that when the object moved. Not toward them, not away. It simply rotated in a way that suggested orientation, attention, awareness. The mass reading spiked and then flattened. The object had noticed the scout vessel. The object had looked at them the way Vethara 7 looked at samples under her instruments, with the flat, methodical attention of something categorizing. "Take us out," Vethara 7 said. "How far?" "Far." Prathais burned the drive at 0.3 G and they ran, and behind them the object did not follow. It simply watched them go. That was almost worse. The conclave's emergency session lasted 9 hours. Vethara 7 presented her findings in the flat, precise language of scientific reporting and watched the senior analysts absorb what she was telling them. She watched the moment it landed, the moment they understood that Earth was not silent because the humans had chosen silence, but because something had come and the humans had not survived the encounter. "We should send a diplomatic contact vessel," said Counselor D. Heth Prime, "to whatever occupies the system now, to establish." "No," Vethara 7 said. The chamber went quiet. Analysts did not interrupt counselors. Monitoring specialists did not contradict diplomatic strategies. Vethara 7 had spent 40 years watching the humans. She had the data. "The object in Earth orbit is not occupying the system," she said. "It is waiting. There is a difference." She pulled up her telemetry, the drive signatures she'd recorded on the way out, the way the debris field distributed mass, the crater age on the moon. The engagement happened approximately 30 years ago. The humans have been silent for 30 years. The object has been in Earth orbit for 30 years. It is not a conqueror. Conquerors move on. It is not a scavenger. There is nothing left to scavenge. It has been sitting above what was Earth for 30 years, and it has done nothing except exist. "Then what is it doing?" D. Heth Prime asked. "I don't know," Vethara 7 said. "That is what concerns me." She was granted a second mission, a larger vessel this time, with a full science complement. She took it back to Saul and set up a monitoring station at the edge of the system, passive sensors only, and she watched. For 6 weeks, the object did nothing. On the 43rd day, it moved. Not toward the monitoring station, toward the moon. It descended, if that word applied to something moving in microgravity, and settled above the largest of the new craters, and something extended from it. A tendril, or a beam, or a process. The instruments disagreed on what to call it. What came out of the crater was a signal. Human spectrum radio. Dense, layered, the chaotic overlapping transmissions that Vethara 7 had spent 40 years learning to read. She sat in her analysis couch with her headset on and listened, and her translation algorithms worked through it. And after 4 hours she had something that was not quite language but was close enough to be terrifying. The humans had left a message. Before the end, before whatever the object was had finished what it had come to do, the humans had stored a message in the rock of their own moon, sealed it in a crater, left it for whoever came looking. Vethara 7 read the message 3 times. It was not a plea. It was not a warning. Those would have been addressed to the conclave, to their neighbors, to the galaxy at large. It was addressed to the object. It said in the compressed, layered, maddeningly ambiguous way of late-period human communication, "We know what you are. We know what you want. We know where you came from. You think this is over. You are incorrect." That was all. No signature, no timestamp, no farewell. Just that carved in the moon, in human spectrum radio, waiting. Vethara 7 read it a 4th time. Then she opened a line to the conclave. "I need to speak to the council," she said. "All of them now." What the humans had left behind was not a graveyard. That had been her first interpretation, and it had been wrong in the way that first interpretations of human behavior were almost always wrong. Too simple, too final, too willing to accept that something that looked like an ending was an ending. It took another 4 months to understand what the debris field actually was. The conclave sent a full science fleet. Vethara 7 ran the analysis herself, checking every instrument, rerunning every model, because the conclusion the data was pointing toward was not one she wanted to present to the council without absolute certainty. The debris field was not random. She'd assumed, everyone had assumed, that it was the wreckage of a civilization destroyed. The orbital mechanics matched a catastrophic event approximately 30 years ago. The mass distribution was consistent with the breakup of large structures under extreme energy application, and the organic matter was real and was what it appeared to be. None of that was wrong. But the debris field had structure, subtle, distributed over billions of kilometers of orbital space, seeded into the pattern of random wreckage with the kind of precision that required extraordinary calculation. Vethara 7 had been looking at it as wreckage. When she started looking at it as engineering, the pattern revealed itself like one of those visual puzzles that humans had apparently found pleasurable, the image that you couldn't unsee once you'd seen it. The debris field was a weapon, or the trigger of one, or the key. She spent 3 days building the model before she let herself believe it. The humans had known they were going to lose. They had known early enough, months, perhaps years before the end, to prepare. And what they had prepared was not a defense and not an evacuation. They had prepared a trap. The object had come. The object had done what it came to do. The object believed it had won. The object had been in Earth orbit for 30 years, and the trap had not triggered yet, and Vethara 7 sat with that knowledge and tried to understand what a 30-year trigger condition looked like. What were the humans waiting for? What condition had they calculated, across the centuries of their civilization's existence, would be worth waiting 3 decades for? She pulled the message again. Read it one more time. You think this is over. You are incorrect. Not we will return, not revenge is coming, just, you are incorrect. A correction. A statement of fact delivered with the flat certainty of someone who had done the math. The object rotated, the mass reading spiked. Something was happening. All ships, Vethara 7 broadcast on the fleet channel. Full emergency burn, clear the system now. She didn't finish the order before the debris field activated. It did not explode. That was the wrong frame. An explosion was energy released outward, indiscriminate, thermodynamic. What the debris field did was more specific than that. The billions of fragments, distributed across 300 billion kilometers of orbital space, oriented simultaneously. The mass readings from Vethara 7's instruments went sideways, numbers climbing past anything she had reference for, and they pointed at the object. The object which had just spiked its own mass readings. The object which had just started whatever process it had come here to begin. The debris field fired. That was the only word for it. Vethara 7's instruments didn't survive the event. Nothing in the inner system survived the event. But the outer system relays recorded what happened in the 3 seconds before the light from the explosion reached them. The object was gone. Not destroyed. Not the way a ship was destroyed, not with wreckage and energy bloom. Gone. Removed. Vethara 7 spent months trying to find a better description and kept coming back to that one. The debris field had done something to the object that her physics couldn't fully model, and the result was absence. Clean and total. The humans had known. 30 years before the end, they had looked at what was coming and done the math, and the math had told them that they could not fight it directly, and they had built a gun that fired on a 30-year delay, and they had loaded it with their own wreckage, and they had gone quiet, and they had waited. No farewell, no warning, no plea for help to the galaxy they'd been slowly joining, just silence and the patience to let the silence do its work. Vethara 7 filed her final report to the conclave from the edge of the Sol system. The sun was a bright star behind her. The debris field was thinning now, disturbed by the energy of its own firing, the orbital mechanics already beginning the slow work of redistribution. The moon was still there, still had its new craters, still had the message in it. She wondered if it was still transmitting. She didn't check. The conclave's response to her report came 40 hours later. It was long and full of the careful, measured language of a body that had just learned something that changed its understanding of a species it had considered categorized. She read it once and set it aside. The thing that stayed with her was not the geopolitical implications, not the question of what the object had been, or where it had come from, or how many more might follow. Those were problems for other analysts, other years. What stayed with her was the calculation, the 30-year patience of it. The humans had known they were going to die, and they had spent their last years not mourning, not transmitting desperate pleas into the dark, not begging the galaxy to understand what was happening to them. They had spent those years building. They had trusted that someone would come looking. They had trusted that the someone who came would be able to read a signal left in a crater on a moon. They had trusted the galaxy enough to leave it a gift, wrapped in their own bones, and they had trusted the gift enough to not explain it. That was the thing about the humans that the Conclave had never quite managed to model. They didn't need to win. They needed to not lose in a way that stayed lost. The scout vessel's drive lit up and she pointed it at home. The stars moved in their slow wheel outside the viewport, indifferent and ancient, and Vethara 7 thought, somewhat less safe than they had seemed this morning. She went to make a cup of something warm and let the dark slide past.